Hi there, I'm JR Kerr, CEO of Handshake. And we're an agency, an impact agency that works with executives and corporations, all who are focused on using their businesses to solve big problems that the world faces. We've historically seen the rise of impact entrepreneurs and impact investors and the real impact that they can have on fixing some of the biggest problems the world faces. But as we've come through this pandemic and as we're coming out of it, increasingly, we're seeing that the impact executive and their corporations are going to play a really significant role in the way the world builds back from what has been the great pause that the pandemic caused and the corollary economic fallout that came from it. Today, we have Sherina Edwards, President and CEO of INTREN, a new friend of ours, but somebody I have to say that I'm really excited to interview today and excited for you all to hear from. So Sherina, great to have you. I was wondering if you could maybe just sort of introduce yourself a little bit and just to kick us off, sort of how did you get here? How did you get to this spot? And maybe even talk a little bit about INTREN. It's an unbelievable company, actually. So
thank you. It's a pleasure to be here as well. It's very nice to speak with you in this way. I am the president and CEO of INTREN, as you mentioned, and INTREN is a utility infrastructure company. We are, a nationwide company. So what we do is we build the infrastructure for utilities. We build the power lines, transmission. We maintain it, we restore it. For example, if you have if there's a storm outage and you're calling your utility to say, I guess maybe for you, JR, it's Con Ed. If you're saying, hey, come restore my power, then they will call us and say, hey, we have 100,000 people out of power, come restore the power. So we do that. We also do the work on the gas side as well, build, maintain, and restore their pipelines on the gas side. So it is a fantastic business and one that it is a necessity. We're an essential business, right? We support the utilities in providing, I like to say, empowering the lives of those across the country. And it is something that is just, particularly in this day and age, infrastructure is everything. And the modernization of infrastructure to ensure that consumers have what they need to go about their daily lives, it's crucial. And so we're at this crossroads of very exciting times in our industry. So we have about a little over 2,000 employees. We have offices in 14 states, and we service utilities from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast with a very heavy presence across the Midwest as well. So that's a little bit about INTREN. I have been at the company since September of last year. So of course, started in the middle of a pandemic, which brings about its own exciting times. Prior to that, though, I did serve on the board of directors for about 2.5 years and was a partner at Quarles and Brady and in the energy and regulatory practice, where I led a regulatory strategy practice, really. And I worked for utilities and energy organizations, helped them build their regulatory strategy, help them, seek out what regulatory approvals they needed, and really build better relationships with their regulators. Prior to that, what brought me into the entire energy industry was my 5-year term on the Illinois Commerce Commission, which I was appointed to back in 2013 by Governor Pat Quinn at the time. And that agency is the regulatory body that regulates all the utilities in the state. So, natural gas, water, sewer, electricity, telecommunications. And that really was my foray into energy, because prior to that, I was a practicing attorney, but I did not do anything with energy or utilities. So it was a brand new step for me. It has been exhilarating every step of the way. I've had the opportunity and really the blessing to wear a lot of hats and titles along my career, but my most important and most cherished is that of wife and mother. And I have a 3-year-old daughter, Mackenzie.
that's great. It's funny. We say at Handshake that boring stuff changes the world, or the stuff that you don't think of really changes the world. That's the way you kind of get to the sort of these root issues that we face as a society today. I'm curious, this is a little teeny bit off script, but as you were talking, I can't help but ask, can you talk a little bit about your business strategy for sustainability and your business strategy for equality? Like, how is a woman of color and a female executive at, largest owned women utility company, how are you leading your company to solve some of these big problems, especially when infrastructure is such a hot topic right now? I would just be curious to hear you react to that.
Right. It's funny. We just were having a conversation, and one of the biggest conversations that we do have, it's really about labor, about the workforce. Yeah. I always say that even though, we are a business of people, our greatest asset at INTREN is our people, right? They're the people who are risking their lives every single day to get up on those lines and to ensure that, people have power. And so because our people is so important, that labor issue is going to be prevalent for us and a priority. And really, we don't just want people, we want the right people in INTREN, right? We want people who are not only going to change the industry by way of their innovative work and innovative thinking, but we want people who are going to be open and who are going to be who understand that a diverse population is the best population. And even now, in conversations with our utilities and utility executives, it is imperative that all of the partners that work with these utilities are representative of the demographics in which they serve, right? So no longer can you have one workforce, even though, utility construction and construction generally is a very white male dominated workforce. That is no longer acceptable, right? We've got to think of different ways. So we've done a few things at INTREN. And since I've started, we have kicked off an INTREN Infrastructure Institute, where we are working to train and bring people in and show them the skills that they need to not just thrive and survive at INTREN, but other utility construction and infrastructure firms across the nation as well. And by doing that, we're able to target a diverse population, bring them in, train them, and honestly, in a way in which they wouldn't otherwise be able to get that training. Unions are, although they are, I think, evolving, they are still, very difficult to get into, and they're very, they're very cut and dry, kind of, one of a kind. Now, like I said, they're evolving, but we've not gotten there yet. So we are really working outside of those unions to figure out how can we develop those skills in those and help to broaden and diversify our workforce. So that's an impact I think that we've done, and then a significant one, and at the cost of the company, because we recognize the importance of it. From a standpoint of equity and equality, I think that I don't look at myself as being, one of the few women. I kind of, my whole life have been, one of the only, enter the blank, fill it in, however you wish. But I think that really focusing on how can you use your strategy, your skills to build upon that, to really go about change. I think that's really the thing that I focus on the most. And I've not had, I've not had a lot of pushback because now maybe there've been some people who are like, okay, well, she's younger, or, she's this, she's that, she's not the average person in the industry. But I've not felt pushback in such a way, because I do think, to balance that out, I do think I work really hard. I ensure that I know the business. I also rely on people who know the business better than me. And for some people, I don't have a lot of ego. So I don't mind saying, I need to have an excellent person here, because that is not my strongest skill set, and relying on them and giving them the props and the recognition to make them feel really good, because they are doing a damn good job to support me in this role and to support the company overall. So I think really something I've done is to really figure out where the holes are, and rely on people who are really good at standing in the gap and promoting them.
There's a ton of advice in there, but that last one I think is critical. We talk a lot about humility actually with the impact executive, and I think it's one of the more underrated, and honestly, one of the more important traits of executives that really lead with strength, is to be humble, right? Just to actually have room for other people to be better, and to have room for other people to have big ideas that we all get to a better place when I think we have room for others. So I love the way you said that. Obviously coming through the pandemic and the economic fallout, there was also just this sort of real focus on racial justice over this past year. I'm just curious, as a woman of color, and just in general, right? Like, forget about the industry you're in. Just, can you talk a little bit about what do you believe the role of the private sector is, the role of corporations and companies to take a stand and to help us fix, I think, what are some real inequities that exist across systemic, like, infrastructure in our society? And that's everything from, you look at even transit in some cities, right? There literally is systemic injustice that occurs, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's transit, whether it's education. And, we look to the public sector a lot to fix these things, and we should look to our government leaders to help fix these issues. But I'm just curious, what role do you think the private sector and companies have to play in helping address some of these inequities?
It's interesting. We've always talked about a public-private partnership as something that's usually, you think it's like infrastructure based or something like that, right? But this is, I think, where there's a shift in what that means. And I absolutely think that it is not just, should not just be left on the shoulders of, the public, the government, local, federal, whatever, to address and to handle. I think that it is the responsibility of every leader to, number one, not pretend like nothing is happening, right? Because it's easy to do that. That's the coward way to go about it. But to really figure out, how do we fit into this? Let's just take the glasses off, the rose-colored glasses off for a second, and say, let me look around this company. What do we look like? What have we not done to ensure that there is fair, an equal representation at this company. Let's take it a step down further and let's look at what does my boardroom look like? What does my executive team look like? And what are you doing to make those types of changes? And I certainly don't point fingers as being at a company as one that is, as large as we are, but quite frankly, is not as diverse as I think as we certainly need to be and where I would like to be. Looking at that instantly was one of the first things that I did.
Hmm.
And said, okay, what can we do here? And one of the first people I hired was a chief legal and HR officer who was a Black woman. And I was at the time the only Black executive at the company. I brought her in. She's phenomenal, both on a legal side and on the HR side. And she's already looked at programs to really figure out how can we work on diversity. Now, I think you have to be careful. You can't go from 0 to 10 overnight. I think you have to put your finger on the pulse of the company, of the people, because what you don't want to do either is make a particular group of people feel like they're being pushed out or not wanted, or there's no chance for their success because they are not of a certain race or ethnicity or gender. So I think that you have to balance that out. But it requires, and I think it is an imperative for executives to take the time to have the difficult conversations and really figure out how are you going to make change. Slapping a chief diversity officer in a seat and putting out a press release is not the answer, right? You really have to think, how are you going to dig deep into the organization and make that cultural change? And oftentimes a lot of the barriers that are preventing that diversity and growth is really at the bottom. So you have to, dig way deep down there. You cannot just skim the surface from the top, from the C-suite. You have to get low.
Great. Completely agree. You mentioned when we did our Clubhouse chat, you had this line describing your work as heart work and not hard work. I'm curious, how does that, what exactly do you mean by that?
So I mean that you have to love what you do. When we think about it, and I'm sure you have before, JR, you have children. So we spend more time, more waking hours at work than we do at home, right, with our families. And so if you're not loving what you're doing, if you're not being driven by what it is that you do, you're already in this kind of warped mode and you're clouded, right? So I say there's hard work because we all have to do it. You have to do it to be successful. You have to work really hard. You can't be afraid of what's difficult or the challenges or the bad days because they're going to come. You have to, climb over those. But hard work is doing what you do, even on the bad days, even when you're not being profitable, even, when you're in the red, you have to do it with passion, and you have to do it with the same passion as if you're having a phenomenal day, right? So if somebody's serving you a dish of ice cream or a bowl of, the worst vegetable in the world that you hate, you have to smile just as equally. You have to say, okay, I'm going to address this. I'm going to tackle it. I'm going to do it with just as much grit and passion and authenticity and excitement as if I didn't want to do it, because people around you are always watching. Eyes are always on you, and they take their lead from you. Your executive team, the people that work for you, your employees, anybody at that company is watching you.
That's great. Well, this has been awesome. Maybe one last question, just in closing. If there's one piece of advice you could give to this next generation of impact executive, what would it be?
It would certainly be to don't let anyone stop you from doing what you think is best. I think oftentimes we get, particularly, as executives, you feel like you get a little bit boxed in. And I don't think that we take the time to really say, you know what, I'm going to be resilient. I'm going to be resilient in this role. We do that sometimes in our personal lives, but we don't necessarily always bring that to work. And I think that you're going to have you're going to see a lot of stop signs. You're going to see a lot of, stop, don't move, don't go, this because of this or because of that or because of that politic. And you have to realize, you know what, as long as I'm doing my best, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to push past it. Because I'm a resilient person. I'm a strong person. I'm one who wants to be here and wants to do this. And I know that I'm doing it for the good of everyone around me and not just myself. And I think that is the most important thing that I could think of to give to a rising executive.
That's great. I love it. Thank you. Thank you. This has been great, Sherina. We really appreciate this. And it's been great getting to know you. And I look forward to, as we discussed before we got on video, doing this live and in person at some point soon. So
absolutely. It was so nice to do this.
Absolutely. Cheers.